from America's Heartland, this is GJRB, Clinton, Iowa. Alright, back on the air for another part of Way Out There tonight on GJRB. And we're going to kind of make this an abbreviated show. Not much material on this edition, but I'll be working on the next one, which we're going to do sometime, probably about December. I'm looking at probably about the first week or so of December when we go back into our program cycle. But I'll be working on some future shows, and we'll have more Way Out There's next month. As this next month is our alternate month. As I said before, programs that normally don't air in a regular program cycle usually airs in our alternate month, so that we get a lot more variety programming here on GJRB. And I'm going to try and work on this next year to make sure this program gets on at least once every couple of weeks or so. Right now, let's get back into the program, and we're going to bring you, as Premier Radio Networks bring you coast to coast all around the nation, all over the USA, Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. And we're going to feature some segments of some of our best shows that were on recently. One of them came from October 18th. Actually, I think the original airing was October 17th, when Peter Barbagal was the guest on there, discussing the connection between rock and roll and the mysterious world of the occult, as seen in lyrics, performance, and album covers. And he talked about the driving force of early popularity of rock and roll. This is from Coast to Coast in October.
What was your favorite so-called occult group, rock group?
Well, I mean, again, what's interesting about that is, you know, which of these groups and which of these people actually practiced, who was maybe just a young fellow or a young woman interested in these things because they had money and access to things, they had more freedom to explore alternative kinds of things. I still think some of the great bands that really, I think, shaped and changed rock and roll in many ways, not only because of their music, and I never want to limit that. I'm not trying to undermine the accepted history of rock and roll. I just want to say that there's this very important and essential thread that we have to be mindful of, this occult thread. I think Led Zeppelin and I think David Bowie in particular are the two standouts that really shaped a reimagining of what rock and roll could be, and how it could be enhanced by this whole mystique, by a whole mythology, by a whole way of thinking that there is a secret language here, and that the fans themselves could, or the media could speculate and say anything they wanted about it, and sometimes the musicians themselves would play coy, right? They'd say, well, you know, we don't really mean it, but maybe later they would say that they did. I'll give you a very funny example if you have a minute in this slide. In an interviews with Jimmy Page, when he was a young man and Led Zeppelin was becoming very, very famous, and here's a guy who suddenly has access to a lot of money, and he started to become interested in Aleister Crowley and in magic, and he would start buying these very expensive and rare volumes, first editions of Aleister Crowley's work. He eventually opened up a bookstore, an occult bookshop called The Equinox, named after Aleister Crowley's magazine, journal, a selection of readings that he put together at the time, and bought one of Crowley's homes called the Boleskine House, where Crowley supposedly performed some very dangerous magical experiments. And when reporters would ask this young Jimmy Page about this, he would say, well, Aleister Crowley, he's a great figure of liberty and of personal freedom, and he could change. We need to look to him as somebody who can change the world. Okay, great. So that helps elevate the mystique of Led Zeppelin as somebody who's in a cult band, or they have this interest in these things. And in a very recent interview with Rolling Stone, here's a much older Jimmy Page. The
still at it.
Is still at it. And the interviewer says to Jimmy Page, he says, so tell me about your interest in Aleister Crowley when at the peak of Led Zeppelin. And Jimmy Page says, why does everybody always ask me about Aleister Crowley? Why don't you ask me about Dante Rossetti, who I loved as an artist when I was a kid? And my answer would have been, well, you set it up. You created this mystique around it. You told everybody that you thought Aleister Crowley was a prophet of a new age. And so there's a sense that it's hard to know when so much of it was the age that they themselves were living in, the culture themselves, how they fed off of each other, right? And maybe as they get older, maybe they're more private about those things, or maybe it's not as important because the world they're living in is different.
What about today? Are musicians still dabbling in the occult? I don't hear much about that.
I think they're dabbling in the imagery, especially, we see that with, Madonna's amazing Super Bowl halftime show looked like an Egyptian mystery cult initiation. And I think she knew very wisely and smartly as a performer and as a shrewd businesswoman that these continue to be symbols and images that key very quickly into the human psyche. That you don't even have to believe in these things to somehow be entranced by them, to be hypnotized by them. We see how a lot of hip-hop artists will flash Masonic symbols and things. And are they Masons, or are they, who knows? We'll never know.
Are they just playing a game?
Are they just playing a game? But it's a smart game, and here's why. Because when we go to watch a magician perform stage magic, and I've said this a number of times, and I say it in the book, that we know that there's a trick. We know that we could be shown how it's done, and that maybe with enough practice we could do it ourselves. And yet when we go into that auditorium or that room, we want to be hypnotized. We want those things to transport us. We want to believe in magic in that moment.
We do.
Maybe when we leave, then we talk about, oh, I know how we did it. But when we're in there, we completely give over to that experience.
We might want to find out, but deep down inside, Peter, we really want to be tricked.
I think so.
So that's taken from an October interview talking about the occult and rock and roll. Stated the fact that a lot of these bands were involved in black magic and witchcraft and all that, which I believe so. I grew up listening to a lot of that rock and roll, and I think to myself now, what made me want to listen to that, and what makes youngsters listen to the music they listen to today or anything like that. I always remember first hearing about that way back when I heard that rock and roll albums such as Led Zeppelin, Metallica, even Ozzy Osbourne had reverse messages in the back of records, and thought, well, why would you want to spin a record backwards? A lot of youngsters apparently did that. I think purposely making their turntables go backwards by, I think, reversing the belt drive or something inside the turntable. Or the other one was, I believe, putting the song on a reel-to-reel. Now, if you know from where, when I first started doing radio, I used to do a lot with reel-to-reel. And I liked reel-to-reel. Actually, I still do. It's a shame that it's not being used anymore. I mean, I had a big Acaia, real nice reel-to-reel deck when I was living there, when I had my other studios years ago. And well, apparently when you record on a reel-to-reel tape and then you turn the tape around the other way, there's nothing on that side of the tape. And I guess if you play it, you can hear the song in reverse from the other side when you flip the tape over. So I don't know if that transverses to the other side of a reel-to-reel going backwards. But I guess apparently it can do that. What do you think of that? This is Gary J. Russell. You're listening to Way Out There on GJRB Online, talking about rock and roll and the occult. And my friend Brian, a couple of nights ago, gave me a mystery, a rock and roll mystery. Can you give me the words to the song Louie Louie by the Kingsmen? You know, that's one song, if you really listen to the words to that. And then one day on the Gary Russell program coming up, which I'll have one another week or so, I'll play a clip of that song and see what you think. Because, you know, technically I've always wondered that myself. So that's a rock and roll mystery. I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to write it. Let's see. Can you sing Louie Louie by the, Louie Louie, the hit record by the Kingsmen? I believe it's 1967 hit record by the Kingsmen. It could be earlier, it could have been 65, but I'm not sure. What year that record come out? I think it was 64 even. 64 or 65, not really 67. If Dave Baker's listening right now, what year did that come out? Anyway, maybe you can tell me, Dave Baker, if you know the words to Kingsman's Louie Louie. Okay, that's a rock and roll mystery that always said, you really never did understand the words to that song. When you listen to the record, do you understand the words? That's the question. I'm going to pose out, see if anybody out there is listening. I'm going to check right now in my Spreaker main page to see if there's anybody even listening at this time. So back to Spreaker for a minute. Main page. And there is no one listening at this time. It's at zip 0. So what do you think of that? Rock and roll mystery. Can you sing Louie Louie from the Kingsmen's 1965, 66, or 67 hit record? If you know it, can you sing it? Do you understand the words? Do you know anything about it? It's a mystery of that song because, that record should have just been an instrumental because the song never did make sense. I played it dozens of times as a disc jockey and thought to myself, what does this song mean? So we're going to talk about that throughout the night. And let's see what you think out there. Give me a line in on what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm on my Spreaker public site. I post on my, I'm sharing on my social sites, and seeing who's out there, folks. Way out there. Who's out there listening to Way Out There? Yeah, that's the question. Anybody out there listening to Way Out There? And let's see, I'm going to go to Twitter again. I usually share on Twitter only because I don't have a way to take phone calls. So what I'm doing a lot of times is to kind of get your reaction by posting at all my sites and sharing on Google Plus, and just taking my shows to all social sites that I can, so to get